Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. I'm sure we're going to have some folks trickle in here as we get underway, but we do want to go ahead and get started in the interest of our presenters' time. So with that, let's go ahead and get underway. We want to welcome you and thank you so much for joining us today for another installment of our research webinar series hosted by our team here at the Michigan Virtual Learning Research Institute. The goal of MVLRI is to expand Michigan's capacity to support new learning models, engage in active research to inform new policies in online and blended learning, and strengthen the state's infrastructures for sharing best practices. MVLRI is a division of MVU, or the Michigan Virtual University, a nonprofit organization whose mission is advancing K-12 education through digital learning, research, innovation, policy, and partnerships. MVU is also the parent company of Michigan Virtual School, a supplemental state-sponsored virtual school, Michigan LearnPort, an online professional development portal for K-12 educators and personnel, and MyBlend, a blended learning initiative providing K-12 schools with resources, products, and services to personalize learning options for their students and improve student achievement. Before we introduce today's presenter and the topic of their presentation, we just want to touch on an important disclaimer for our research webinar series. This webinar is recorded publicly and shared publicly. Consequently, anything shared during this webinar, including chat comments, could be shared publicly. This webinar may represent a presenter's or an attendee's personal views, opinions, conclusions, and other information which do not necessarily reflect those of MVU and/or the Michigan Virtual Learning Research Institute and are not given nor endorsed by MVU/MVLRI unless otherwise specified. We want to go ahead and introduce today's presenter. Today we'll be hearing from Jeremy Reel. Jeremy is the coordinator at the Faculty Assistance Center for Technology at UIC and a PhD student of educational psychology. His research is focused on teacher professional development and support in online spaces and the use of learning analytics in these types of spaces. Jeremy also works with Kim Lawless and Scott Brown, who are the directors of the Global Ed 2 project. Global Ed 2 is a middle school blended social studies curriculum that is offered in many states. On Global Ed, Jeremy is responsible for the technology, professional development, and online design elements of the curriculum. Jeremy, Kim, and Scott work every week to make sure that teachers of Global Ed are supported as they implement the curriculum. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Jeremy so we can hear more about the program.
Hey everybody, thank you for attending this webinar and listening to a little bit about what we're doing at the Global Ed 2 project. Global Ed, as Justin mentioned a little bit ago, it's an effort between two universities, University of Illinois at Chicago and the University of Connecticut, where we implement and support teachers' implementation of a social studies middle school curriculum that is done half online and half in a classroom. The portion of the talk today, I'm not going to talk as much about the curriculum as I am as on the PD that's focused on implementing the curriculum. So, as you can expect, there are a lot of challenges that teachers face when implementing blended curricula. So, what we need to do is to identify these challenges as they occur and then provide what we're calling responsive online professional development to teachers as challenges pop up, and then we can jump in and help them out. This talk is based on a paper that we recently wrote for the Journal of Online Learning Research. I encourage you to check it out. It will have a lot of the specific details about some of the findings that we had in here, including some of the, I'll be referencing a lot of these, but you can get a nice little inventory of the challenges that we found in our qualitative study, as well as some of the categories and subcategories of challenges that we found to be an issue when implementing this curriculum for kind of the first time for a lot of novice teachers. Thank you, Justin. Justin has posted the link in the chat window. So basically what we start with is this idea that we immediately assume that there were going to be challenges with implementing a new curriculum. It seems to always happen. It's normal to not know what's going on. So our issue here was that there aren't any in the research literature, there's not a lot of examples of formal programs that have specific implementation goals to ask the teachers how they're doing. Just take a moment to stop when teachers are implementing a curriculum. Hey, how's it going? What's going on? Can we help you at all? And we've seen that in the literature. And then there are many issues. So if we are supporting teacher implementation and trying to anticipate every issue that's going to come up in a kind of an upfront PD that teachers get, there are many issues that teachers are only going to encounter during practice, and talking about them may be a little helpful at the beginning, but it's not going to really be an issue until they're doing it. So we're seeing that in some of the literature as well, that we want to create a PD experience that provides teachers opportunities to work with the instructional designers and the curriculum staff to help implement this curriculum in the best way possible as they're doing it. So our main mandate here is that if we want PD for implementation to work, it needs to address issues as they happen. So it's also well established that ongoing PD is good. Things that happen over time have been cited over and over in the literature that the longer a PD experience, the better at getting across the skills, knowledge, etc., that the PD's goals are trying to meet. It's less known, though, on how to accomplish these things. So we kind of have 5 points here of what guided our PD. So we needed methods for identifying what teachers are doing in the first place, which is always a tough thing to capture, what teachers are doing in the classroom. How this practice aligns with how the instructional designers intended the curriculum to be implemented, and how the intended implementation is realistic or not. Does it look like what we thought it would look like in the classroom, or are there things happening in the classroom that are completely different than we anticipated? And then identifying some of these challenges that teachers face in meeting the intended implementation goals, and then kind of reaching a synthesis with the teachers, together with the teachers, and the teachers are involved in this process as well, to create a curriculum implementation that has a high degree of fidelity to the original intent and meets the kind of theoretical learning goals that the curriculum is built upon. So the key here is listening to the teachers. And so we wanted to figure out a method to listen to the teachers in PD over time and then integrate that into our PD offerings. So what we've come up with over the last 4 years, this project Global Ed 2 has been around for over a decade, but in its current instance is it's an IES funded grant that is in its 4th year of implementation now. And so what we've come up with over these last 4 years is this concept of responsive online professional development. It's our framework for providing PD over time, specifically with the intent of high fidelity of curriculum implementation. And this isn't, when I say high fidelity, it isn't saying you have to do it exactly this right way. What we're trying to do is kind of meet these underlying design principles that the curriculum was built on and find ways to match how it's being done in the classroom. And as you can imagine, as we start to scale up, it's being implemented in a variety of different ways. And so we have to figure out a way to track the challenges that teachers are having, track the ideas that teachers are having, the issues that they're having, and align them with what's happening in the curriculum and its design. So a question here, the difference in fidelity and efficacy. Fidelity, what we're meaning is just we had the curriculum design and the instructional designers who worked on the curriculum have an intended way of how it would be done. There are specific activities that students would do, specific ways of teaching the curriculum. There are specific things that need to be done at certain milestones for the curriculum to succeed. And I'll demonstrate that in a little bit when I talk a little bit about the curriculum specifically. Efficacy in our, in the way we use efficacy is meeting the intended outcomes of the curriculum themselves. So we have some specific learning goals that we're trying to meet as well with the curriculum, and I actually talk about that a little bit too, a little bit later. Okay, cool. So our ROPD approach, we're trying to address specific implementation goals as we think that they're necessary when we're designing the curriculum. We can anticipate some things through the prior literature or we can anticipate some needs are going to be common. So we can try to implement, put that into our PD that we provide. We want, though, collaborative development of solutions. We know that problems are going to occur. We know that challenges are going to pop up. And we know that a top-down approach may not be the best way to get, what to either even understand what's going on in the classroom. We need to have some feedback from the teachers to know what's going on. So our goal here is to connect curriculum experts to the teachers that are implementing the curriculum to discuss these emergent challenges. We want to kind of identify, categorize, and record the anticipated and unanticipated teacher needs during implementation. And we also want to reduce the memorization burden on teachers. In an upfront PD, there's a lot of information that's given to teachers. Okay, here's how to implement it, and you get a big binder, and okay, go. And so that's a lot of memorization. You have to remember where everything is. So what we try to do is to create enough familiarity with the curriculum at first, and then we handle some things as we go along the way. So our goal here is to kind of capture and work within the process of implementation and getting a long-term exposure to PD intervention, the different PD interventions that we provide, and not just having the PD succeed and having the curriculum succeed. So I'm going to give you a little bit of context of how we designed this. The goal of the study here was we wanted to build a method for doing what we call a needs analysis during PD. So there's a whole bunch of stuff going on. We have a whole bunch of feedback coming in from teachers through the journals that I'm going to demonstrate, but we needed a method for kind of extracting what's happening in the classroom and what the teachers are facing and the challenges that they're facing, and then turning that into some kind of having some kind of systemic process that we can turn it into a list that we can act upon. So I'll give you a little bit of context about the curriculum first, and then the kind of PD offerings we have, and then I'll get into the list of the challenges that we identified through the qualitative data analysis that we did. So Global Ed 2 is the middle school social studies curriculum. It's blended in the sense that half of it occurs within a classroom, an actual physical classroom with teachers, students, teachers, aides, etc., and then half of it occurs in a kind of an online negotiations. It's a negotiations based, kind of like a Model UN, but we have a very special way of handling the discussions between the students. So it happens in kind of this online simulated environment where students interact with other students from other classrooms. So as you can imagine, there's some challenges there. If a teacher's never encountered any kind of asynchronous or synchronous online environment, especially when interacting with other students from other classrooms, this could be an interesting thing when implementing. The curriculum is also problem-based in that the whole body of work that students produce during the curriculum it's based around a problem scenario that we give students at the onset of the curriculum. From the first week, when they start, they're given a real-world problem that they have to solve. And they don't solve it by themselves, and they don't solve it in their class. Like I mentioned, they solve it in kind of an online negotiations with all these other students. The project is currently operating in 2 states, and we're doing research efficacy trials right now through the Institute of Educational Sciences, trying to determine how it works under different conditions. And so we're operating in 2 states, multiple classrooms. The curriculum is served over 6,000 students, and each year we typically have between 20 and 60 classrooms that we interact with overall. So our curricular goals, and this is what we mean by efficacy, is we have some specific goals that we want the curriculum to actually achieve. And then our PD efforts are to support the achievement of these curricular goals. So it's a social studies curriculum, so we clearly want to develop social studies knowledge. But we also try to get more bang for our buck. Most social studies curricula in middle school classrooms are built to work within 40-minute classroom times, and it's really tough to integrate other disciplines, other subjects in that time, because you got to focus on either history or economics or whatever the area of study is. So what Global Ed tries to do in its problem-based approach is to kind of bring a whole bunch of things in together. Science knowledge and science literacies. So we try to develop students' writing during this process. And so we have some very specific other goals that we try to achieve on top of gaining social studies knowledge, which is the development of socio-scientific literacies, which is the ability to interact kind of at the synthesis point between science and social science. And we also try to increase students' interest and confidence in science topics, science careers, and social studies all together at the same time. The problem scenario that we provide students is a science-based problem. So we expect that science topics have to get brought in, but it's really difficult to talk about the science without the social studies aspect as well when you're talking about a broad, open problem that's not been solved before. And all of this occurs within the online space, as I mentioned, and it's all text-based, and there are some specific reasons for that. So what we're trying to also accomplish here is improvement in argumentative style writing and writing in general. So as we're able to bring these different subjects in, we're actually trying to expand the curricular space past this 40 minutes of limited time that students have in a social studies class. And we're trying to kind of get more bang for our buck by interacting with kind of broader problems and interacting with students from around the country. So as I mentioned before, a GE2 simulation, and we like to think of it as a simulation. It's a negotiations kind of seminar that students arrive at. They're assigned a country, each classroom gets a country that they are delegates to an international negotiations summit. And this summit occurs in our online space. We give them this global real world problem scenario. This year we're doing water scarcity, global water scarcity, sanitation, etc. Some countries have water, some don't. Let's solve this problem because the UN has identified global water scarcity as a critical goal for meeting human rights needs in the 21st century. A previous one we've done is food scarcity and the upcoming need to feed billions more people than we currently have on the planet. But as population continues to increase, food capacity gets smaller, and so we need to figure out ways to provide food, especially in countries that do not have the same kind of capacity to produce, distribute, or buy food that others do. So we give students a real-world problem scenario. Hey, here's the scenario. The scenario takes place in the future, so it's not bound to real world happening events. So if there was a famine happening in one part of the world right now, they wouldn't be using that news from that world, that part of the world. It happens about 2-3 years into the future. So we try to eliminate the impact of something drastic happening while the scenario is going on. And then so all of the negotiations, students work together in their classrooms, but then the other half of their time, all the negotiations take place in this text-based environment. Where students, as formal delegates to this symposium, they provide proposals, they interact with other countries, they try to get their agendas across, and they try to encourage other countries to adopt their ways of approaching the problems. And then toward the end of the simulation, students all submit proposals to the problem, and then the top proposals are voted on, and then we throw a pizza party for the student group that gets the top votes on the proposal. So there's a little bit of incentive there for the students. It's exciting for them to see their proposals being taken up, and kind of getting to interact with other students from around the country too is a pretty exciting element for a lot of these students. Global Ed operates over 14 weeks. Each simulation, and again, like I mentioned before, the simulations, their topics change, but the overall structure of implementing Global Ed 2 is the same for every implementation. So the first phase is the research phase, and this occurs for 4 weeks, and this is where the students are assigned their country. They are they're actively looking on the internet for information about their country. They're trying to find out the cultural aspects, the historical aspects, the political aspects, the scientific aspects that are all facing their country based on the water scenario, food scenario, whatever scenario we end up giving them. And so these problem scenarios are introduced students will build an opening statement to the summit, the interactive phase summit, and this opening statement serves as their first kind of formal document that they submit to the other students. And as I mentioned before, there's a kind of a big work product at the end of each phase and throughout each phase. So there's a lot of writing that happens in this. The interactive phase kicks off on week 5. Students start to interact both asynchronously and synchronously with other classrooms, proposing their ideas. And then so students will propose ideas in individual messages. And then we also host live conferences, which happen at a very specific time. They're usually for an hour at a time, and they focus on a particular issue area, such as economics, human rights, health, where the students will interact with each other in real time with a moderator named SimCon, who keeps kind of everything formal, keeps everything diplomatic, and makes sure students stay on track on the agendas for that particular live conference. So they're like email-like messages that students interact with each other, and then in the live conference, it's more like an instant messenger, real-time discussion. And then for the last 2 weeks, the students debrief, as we know that reflection and taking a step back and looking at what happened kind of will facilitate transfer of kind of the bigger concepts that they've learned and the procedures that they've used to get where they are. We know that the literature has shown us that reflecting on the process and debriefing on the process will actually give a lot of insight to the students for later on use. So what we, and then, in between, sandwiched in here are the pre-assessments and post-assessments, and this is our research model that we're using right now with IES. We do pre-assessments and post-assessments to see if the curriculum has achieved what it was expected to achieve. And so we have multiple countries that show up in this online environment. Each classroom is a country, and each student is a delegate of that country to this conference. The United States is always played by a college student, and what we try to do is have the United States. This gets students, the middle school students, out of something familiar and having to research something new. And the United States also kind of keeps conversation going. It's usually like a political science student or a policy student that can talk about the issues that are being discussed here. And then in the middle here, we've got this image here of SimCon, who is that's their name in the simulation. There's somebody that's hired by the curriculum to moderate all the communications that go on among students and keep things diplomatic and make sure that conversation is flowing. So if something's not happening, if it's very dull in the conversation, SimCon will prod some students to participate and provide some questions to get things going. Each classroom has 4 issue area groups that students are divided into, and this allows students to kind of focus on one particular area in their research and in their negotiations. And then they all come together as a class to provide kind of a unified country voice when they go back to the full conference. And then this is what the environment looks like. There's a lot of messages that happen. Students, like I said, it's like email type messages, and then they just negotiate throughout the semester. Here's another view of it, a screenshot. So we've got a lot of implementation challenges going on. In general, it's a new curriculum for a lot of our teachers that we interact with. We need to support that just as much as any new curriculum needs to be supported. But it's also a problem-based learning curriculum and a blended learning environment. So many of the teachers we've interacted with have not interacted with these 2 types of learning at all. And so we've had to do a lot of support there. Not to mention we get some more descriptors here. It's also a distributed learning environment with many different classrooms. And we have distributed coaching, PD support, and other teachers that are involved in this process as well. A lot of teachers have not participated solely in just online PD for implementing a curriculum. A lot of those are often face-to-face. So all of our PD is provided online, which is new to some of our teachers as well. So our goal here, same as mentioned in the beginning of the presentation, is that attending to teachers' needs as they arise are important, and our PD should be able to support all of this. So our PD happens as teachers are implementing the curriculum. We operated under this assumption, and the biggest thing here is that we needed a systematic way to identify things as they were emerging, because we could straight up ask teachers, and we did ask teachers, hey, is there anything we can do to help you? But we may not get as much information as we need as we go along. So teachers may not always be forthcoming, or they may not even know that they need something, or they may not have time to fill out our requests when we ask them. So we need ways to figure out how teachers are implementing the curriculum and what we could do to help. So that's where this study comes into effect. Our study is 54 middle school teachers from 2 different states. It's an even mix of suburban and urban teachers, which has been pretty nice. So we're able to see kind of what has happened in kind of both areas. Some of the teachers were veterans of global ed of only 1 year. We did a small pilot study of global ed for 1 year. And so 10 of the teachers in this 54 had done that small pilot study. And we provided a upfront PD and implementation stipend for teachers to implement our curriculum. All of this was voluntary, and we recruited via the internet and social media to get people involved with this project. Teachers taught 2 different classes. That was part of the condition of teaching, is that for our study, our broader global ed study, we needed teachers to teach global ed in one classroom and then teach another class that's kind of what they would have done normally before they met us. So we called that normal educational practice. And so what that did is that served as an intervention and control for our experiment that we're doing with global ed. So 14 weeks, but before the 14-week implementation period, teachers participated in a 3-week self-paced online PD course that kind of gained that, the intent was to gain that familiarity with the curriculum before we started the ROPD and long-term support. So our first approach, the first thing that we do is this upfront PD. It was done on Moodle online, and it was video-based modules, and we also included message boards, other discussions, and we had, at the end of each module, teachers produce a relevant classroom work product that they would be able to integrate directly into their classroom and kind of refer back to when things came up. And then, so after the curriculum starts, we do the 14-week ROPD, where we, the idea here is actively responding to teacher needs as they arise. So we do, every week, we ask teachers to fill out a teacher log with some specific questions about how things went, what they're planning on doing, and kind of, is there any, in that specific question, is there anything we can do to help you out? After they fill out the log, our staff goes through kind of a needs assessment process, and that's part of what this study we were trying to build a method for doing this needs assessment. And then based on the needs assessment, the staff curates a set of resources and helps them address those needs that were identified. Then once the resources are curated, so when we say resources are curated, we're talking about interacting with curriculum experts, other subject matter experts. If teachers don't know about one particular thing and ask for help somewhere, we would go out and actively recruit someone to get an interview, or we would try to find worksheets or other curriculum materials on the web for teachers so that they can kind of take some of the load off of them and focus on implementing the curriculum and having a dedicated support staff kind of helping them out. And so we would communicate these findings back with teachers each week. And we also, we maintained a website for teachers with updates and persistent teacher resources. We had this available 24 hours a day, and they could always, that was kind of the one thing we always drove home, is that if you needed something, you can always go search on the website. If we've found it or provided it in response, you can find it on the website. And so here's the PD website, the upfront PD website that we did. This is the 3-week self-guided PD before we implemented. And so there are a number of modules here. It's those gray tabs, and then they all kind of fell into a general categories, set of general categories here. And so each module had a series of videos. You watch the video, you hit continue. There were a variety of little activities that just kept people engaged. And then the focus of each module, though, was the end product that teachers would do to create some kind of work product that will be useful in their classroom. So in the module on assessment, for instance, we would talk about assessment, talk about the different types of assessment in Global Ed 2 and how it interacts with Global Ed 2 specifically, and then have teachers kind of develop a first crack at an assessment plan, because teachers still have to give grades, and with a problem-based learning environment, it can be kind of tough to give grades if you've never encountered that before. So we have them try to create work products at the end of every module. This is a screenshot of the persistent teacher website. It was always available. It was password protected so that students wouldn't be able to get on here. And there wasn't much cheating because it was a problem-based learning environment. There were no right answers, but we just kind of wanted to keep it behind a veil for the teachers to have access to, and the students had their own version of a website that they were able to access as well. Teachers would also submit their they would submit their teacher log on this website. They could access the water cooler, which was a teacher discussion board, and then get updates. And any of those updates, like we mentioned, the curated list of resources that were generated each week in response to a question that pops up from a teacher or a need, we would go quickly find someone who knew something about it and then try to provide that back to teachers. So in this case, this was a podcast that we did with a chemist who is also a learning scientist. There was a question about desalination, and teachers were having a hard time finding something at grade level. And so we went to this chemist/learning scientist at our university and did a quick interview with him, and he did a nice little science demo on desalination that was at student level. So it was really exciting to be able to do that. Teachers really appreciated that. And that's kind of the idea of, hey, I need this. We go out and find it, and then it gets sent back to teachers. And so we found out all of this information through a weekly teacher log. And it's all from the literature. We're also looking at terms of journaling, the kind of a reflection that teachers do each week. And so journaling, we found in the literature that it can actually help teachers reflect on their practice and gain new insights about their practice, but it actually also helps an instructional design team to get a glimpse into classroom practice. We can ask some specific prompted questions about what's going on, and we can find out what's going on, how we can help. Our specific prompts here that we used in our teacher log, we had these 6 prompts. These are in the paper. I don't need to discuss all these except number 1 and number 6. Number 1 is the main one we used for this study, pretty much asking what happened in the classroom. And number 6 is that specific question that we asked, hey, is there any way we can specifically help you? So these 2 questions, although the others have helped and provided lesser amounts of information about the needs that teachers are facing, questions 1 and 6 were where a majority of our information came from. And it was submitted on Google Forms. We just had them weekly go onto the teacher website and fill out these prompts on a Friday after we send out the news bulletin for the upcoming week. Hey, this is what's coming up with Global Ed, but also remember to fill out your teacher log for the week. So we kind of got into a routine of every week, teachers would fill out a teacher log on Friday, and we would send out an email about the upcoming week. So here's our issue. We needed to do a needs analysis of this teacher log and figure out what teachers need. The week aspect here was a natural unit, a time for analysis, because it was kind of like the natural curricular unit. So when we think about cycles of ROPD, we liked the week as our unit here because teachers can reflect and then we can respond, and the week, with the weekend spread out, kind of spacing it and sandwiching it in, we were able to communicate back with teachers within a reasonable amount of time. And so we would send out this news bulletin each week in their email. We'd be able to track what people were doing in their email through the links they clicked to see what was useful to them, and then we would start the whole process over again on a Friday. And so we do this thing. Let me see, I got the slide here. Yeah, okay. So we kind of created this feedback loop that happened every week. Ideally, we would want this process to feedback live, but we didn't yet have this process, and that's what this paper is about. It's kind of building out this process and specifically focusing on that needs analysis, creating a systemic approach for identifying classroom events and then the specific issues that teachers are facing. So our needs analysis for this paper was It was an evaluative, we focused on evaluative statements that teachers made in the teacher logs, and we felt that they would serve as indicators for either perceived or non-perceived challenges that they were facing when compared to what we expected teachers to do in a particular week. So we conducted an inductive analysis, which we also considered as a basic qualitative study, where we did kind of an iterative process of qualitative coding, tagging, and finding themes and broader categories of teacher challenges from the data, and then we moved up toward these broader categories. The teacher logs were first output in Excel from Google Forms. We had to import those. We had to clean them up a little bit. We imported them to NVivo for analysis. In the end, we had 442 teacher logs from the 52 teachers. And as you can expect, teachers didn't fill out every teacher log every week, even though we encouraged them to. And there was a continual reminder. It's still tough to do, but we still did generate quite a bit of data from just putting it out there and asking teachers to do it. So we had 3 steps to finding what we called a negative statement. And a negative statement is one in which we identified as having potential for showing that something wasn't going according to plan or something was a challenge. And so the first step was finding a classroom event. And this was kind of the first tag that we did in our analysis. The code was any use of a verb by teachers in their logs. So anytime we saw a verb, we would code it with a process code, or we would say that this is a process, this is a verb. The second step was identifying evaluative statements, which was kind of one step further, so the next pass through the data, finding any time that there was kind of an evaluative qualifier added on to it. So was it good or bad, or was it done well, or was it done poorly, or was I happy about it, was I sad about it? Either way, if there was some kind of evaluative statement on it, any description of an event that assessed how it went, we tagged that. And then from those tags, those codes, we went to coding the negative statements, where those were the ones that were explicitly or inferred negative and indicated areas where the teachers might improve if they think it didn't go well. So we ended up finding 517 negative evaluative statements among the 52 teachers. The median was 10 negative evaluative statements over the 14 weeks for each teacher. The minimum was 3 and the max was 24. So our challenges that we found, this iterative inductive process, and we ran through this multiple times to try to collapse the process codes that we had, these verbs that we were finding. And then we started to try to lump them together into themes over the qualitative studies iterative process. In the end, we resulted with 6 main categories, which were composed of 18 subcategories, and then they were further composed of 83 unique process codes. So I refer you to the paper to see all the 83 unique process codes that were done during the iterative process, but I'll run over these 18 and 6, which are kind of, we were really happy to find these because it was our first real evidence of, hey, these are some of the things that our teachers are explicitly facing, rather than it just being anecdotal or hearsay evidence that, hey, we need to fix this. So the first set of challenges are challenges in working with students on curriculum activities, and this was the most frequent. This was the one we probably expected the most. So I'm going to read from the paper here too, a couple quotes to exemplify some of these. But the first one had 164 instances communicating with peers and online participants from other schools, which that's a new thing to a lot of these teachers and to students. So this was a big issue, especially if your blended classroom interacts with outside people. Some blended curricula occur within just the classroom. Some occur kind of in the broader sense with more than one classroom, and this was really important for teachers to get a hold of. So this was quickly followed up with the problem-based aspect of this curriculum as well, which was studying the problem and gathering information. Students were challenged with having to find resources that help them identify the problem and provide proposals to the problem in the online space, as well as doing internet type research, finding quality information, things like that. So teachers, we found that as we expanded research to the internet and expanded into a problem-based environment, teachers were having a lot of issues with that. So we really wanted our ROPD to be able to identify ways to help teachers and support them doing that. Teachers in blended environments, and I definitely assume that this is any environment really, but teachers were in our curriculum, we found that teachers were having problems critically evaluating, or students were having problems critically evaluating problems and tasks, and teachers were having problems supporting the students doing that. And then, this is with any curriculum also, but having enough background knowledge to be able to meet the goals of the curriculum is also important for students and for teachers to be able to help students get to that point. There were 66 instances, so number 2 here, this is the student self-management, which was really important with a blended curriculum where students were doing some of the work on their own and working with other students from around the country. Doing self-guided, self-initiated work was the most frequent in this category. We had a lot of teachers expressing either frustration or challenges with their students being self-guided, and especially in some classes where things are fed to students and the procedures are really well delineated, in a problem-based and even blended environment, it can be actually really tough to do this kind of self-guided work. It's different. So teachers were expressing some challenge with doing that. Keeping activities active and relevant, I think, probably applies to any kind of curriculum, but it's especially so with blended, as the environment leaves the classroom space and moves into online, teachers actually lose some of the control associated with activities, and so need to figure out ways to kind of keep things lively and focused on an active learning approach. And so teachers, 56 different counts of that in our study showed that teachers were having challenges with that. And then again, another one that probably isn't blended learning specific, but focusing on staying on task was a tough thing for teachers to promote with students. Our curriculum is probably more complex than others when it comes to work expectations and work products. So we expected to find some of this in our study here, but there were this third category of challenges that teachers face was establishing work expectations and balancing work of different grain sizes, establishing goals and expectations, doing work out of class, and understanding curriculum roles. All of these were issues that teachers had with our curriculum and trying to get students to know what they're supposed to be doing in the first place, what the work should look like, and especially in the online environment, what the interactions should look like, what the negotiations should look like, how diplomatic should people be, that kind of stuff. Getting the expectations across was kind of tough at times. So our PD tried to support that as we went along. Again, this is not a blended learning specific challenge, but this fourth category of curriculum orchestration was finding and prioritizing time to do curriculum, and we would hope that our curriculum actually increases the bang for our buck, but it still comes down to finding time and prioritizing time to do the curriculum in the short 40 minutes that teachers often have when they have a class section. And then, so implementing the curriculum as prescribed is always going to be a challenge, and we expected to see that as well. And completing work and being productive, meeting deadlines. Global Ed is full of deadlines and full of milestones and specific times that things have to be completed. So doing this was a challenge that we identified in the data for teachers as well. This was a really big one for our curriculum. We feel that this fifth category of outside of the classroom challenges, there's school factors, especially when we're dealing with time and timing of things. So the live conferences happened at different times, not always when social studies class was happening. So navigating school factors, working with other teachers, working with principals, working with support staff to do global ed is tough, and especially as things move outside the classroom into a blended space, it can get tough. So this is definitely a challenge that will persist with blended learning. And then back to this time issue, there is variation in scheduling for our synchronous activities. If there's any kind of live component, this gets kind of tough to do, and so it's important to support teachers and figure out ways to make this work for the most people. And then 6, as we move into a blended learning approach, technology is always going to be an issue. Things break, things need to be learned. So technology problems emerge, and we need to be able to support that. So we have a support staff ready to go. We try to help with those as soon as they happen. We have usability issues with our curriculum. We have some specific apps, such as the online environment where students negotiate and do the simulation. We need to make sure that stays usable and that students can find what they're looking for and to be able to do what they're supposed to do. And then technology fluency of teachers and students both is an issue that arose in our data as well, with a few categories or a few codes that we found, 17, but enough to include in this technology challenges as well. So where are we? We're really excited because we were able to generate an empirical list of challenges that teachers face when implementing our blended learning curriculum. So we know it happened. It's no longer anecdotal, and we can use this to design our stuff better. We would love for this to have happened live, but we didn't yet have the method. So after the fact is cool too, because it's better than nothing, and now we have a list of things to plan for in future iterations. And although Global Ed is not the same as any other blended learning curriculum, some of the lessons we've learned here may be really helpful to other designs as well, and providing professional development to teachers. So we kind of base it on this line of expected implementation. Our future work is going to involve kind of setting this benchmark of expected implementation of what we expect to see happening in classrooms, and then kind of comparing it to what the teachers' journals are showing is happening. And then it's not that the instructional designer's expectation is correct of what should be happening, but it's a starting point at being able to find where there may be a mismatch, and then communicating with the teacher, trying to figure out what that mismatch is, and then creating a synthesis approach to figuring out how to best implement while retaining the fidelity of the underlying design principles and theories associated with the curriculum and how we approach learning. There have been some questions of reliability on this process, but I mean, there's no real great way to collect what's happening in classrooms. We've done classroom observations also, and those are way more costly and much more, there's definitely an observer effect involved with that as well. So what we found with this study is that teachers were quite willing to share what was going on, especially if there were challenges. They wanted to let us know. And at the same time, they were, as long as it was viewed as kind of a formative assessment, that we were just trying to help them out, and it wasn't being used against them in some way, the teachers were absolutely helpful. They were wanting to do it just as good as we were wanting to do it, and so we just wanted to provide the best experiences for students. So our challenge here, though, is identifying the various challenges that teachers didn't necessarily perceive. So we asked that explicit question at number 6 that, hey, is there anything we can help you out with? We are trying to get to a point where we can start identifying challenges that they don't specifically articulate to us. And so that's part of our future work as well. And we're going to base that on expected implementation, kind of this benchmark measure of things we expect to see, and then comparing it to what we actually see in the teacher logs. So our challenge here is keeping it personal. We want to continue to ask teachers what's going on. But the problem is when we scale up, we want to make sure that we don't lose that. And we want to be able to address common issues that are coming up. But at the same time, if we get too specific, it's tough. Yeah, thanks for coming, Diane. These systematic processes like this will be able to help us with scale. As we scale up, if we can have specific processes like the qualitative study we did in here, it can help us speed up this needs analysis process and provide our resources back to teachers faster. But we still, I think one of the big points that we want to make here is that a dedicated staff does wonders, and that anytime a curriculum is designed, some dedicated staff that are focused on teachers' needs really can help with implementation. And then another approach, and this is a personal area of research interest of mine, but I think that data mining, machine learning, and learning analytics can all maybe play a role in this someday too, to be able to help identify challenges that are emerging. And then we also want to program a new journaling interface and not just use Google Forms, but it's been pretty useful to us. And then some kind of computer coded system for doing the needs analysis coding could be really useful too. So I think I'm sort of on time here. Does anybody have any questions about all of the stuff that I know I had to do a lot of context setup here, about the PD that we do, the curriculum. But if anybody has any questions, I'd love to talk.
Sure, we'll allow a minute there in case Kevin's got some questions. But I'm just curious, we've been focusing on a very specific context with the Global Ed 2 program, but and I know you don't want to stretch kind of the implications of the research that you're doing, but can you talk maybe a little bit briefly about what kind of generalizability you see for something like the ROPD program in outside of, let's say, the specific context of the Global Ed 2 program?
Yeah, and I mean that's part of the game here, right? Is that it is highly contextual within kind of a, I would suggest maybe a generalizable framework. I think that any kind of practitioner that has a support staff, the practitioner could benefit from this journaling aspect that we have, this weekly teacher log. Um, and at the same time could benefit from a support staff that may not be more knowledgeable or an expert in the area, but could at least like their focus would be on finding and wrangling all of the necessary resources that the professional might need. So I think that the ROPD aspect of our global ed project is definitely generalizable, and I would love to see it applied in more directions. The content that's produced from ROPD may definitely not be generalizable, but the kind of the procedure that we used here to identify challenges, it's based on the base unit of analysis is the event that's occurring in the classroom, and that could be translated to any number of things. It could be translated into higher ed classroom events. It could be translated into teaching events. It could be translated into any kind of action that's happening. So if you build it from there, you might be able to kind of create a more. I mean, I think any ROPD needs to be custom, and the whole idea is to listen to the practitioner. But I think the framework is pretty generalizable here, or at least would be worth studying in multiple contexts. I don't want to, like you said, I don't want to make too many claims here because it is just one context, but theoretically could be applicable in multiple aspects. And then if anybody would like to read more, we've got some other papers that we've written on our ROPD approach. This paper that I presented on today is just talking specifically about the coding process that we use for the needs analysis, but we have some other papers on ROPD. So I encourage anybody who's interested to check out my ResearchGate profile as well as the ResearchGate profiles of my two co-authors who we've written extensively on the ROPD and Global Ed 2 project as well. So check that out. You can find their profiles just by searching their names as well. So big thank you to everybody who watches this video later, who was here today, for letting us share our work with you.
Great. Thank you so much, Jeremy. That was, I really appreciate the comprehensiveness of this study and really getting a great sense of what teachers are really facing on the ground and how we can try to support them. So I really appreciate you presenting with us today. Want to encourage our attendees and the viewers of this video to really reach out to Jeremy and his co-authors here and really dig a little bit more deeply into the work that they're doing. I posted the link to the JOLR paper there in the chat window, so I want to encourage folks to try to utilize this work however they best can. With that, we're just going to wrap up a few housekeeping issues here. We do want to make all of our viewers and attendees aware of a couple of our ongoing initiatives here at the Michigan Virtual Learning Research Institute. We have a podcast series that we call Virtual Viewpoints, where we talk to folks who are using or doing research in K-12 online and blended learning. And we just kind of provide some high-level overviews of the work that they're doing. You can find us there on, or that podcast there on SoundCloud. That's kind of where we host most of our recordings. But we also have our listings in iTunes and the Play Store as well. You can also check out our guest blogger program if you're interested in writing for us, presenting some of your own original research or work. I'd encourage you to check out the link there to learn more about our guest blogger program if you'd like to blog for us. We also have a webinar upcoming. We actually have a webinar in 2 days, so kind of double dipping this week, but we have some presenters from Kennesaw State University who are going to present some original research on online teacher job satisfaction and looking at some of the factors that are involved in online teacher retention as well. So we encourage you to attend there and join the conversation with us. Same time, 2 p.m. Eastern, this coming Wednesday. And then lastly, we want to encourage you to keep in touch with us. You can email us at mvlri@mivu.org. There's a link there also to sign up for our mailing list where we make folks aware of our upcoming webinars, our basically newly published research or projects or resources. We also have Facebook and Twitter where you can follow us, a LinkedIn page, our YouTube site where you can actually view our recorded webinars, and you can read about our upcoming webinars at our webinars page on our website at mvlri.org/presentations/webinars. Alrighty, well with that, we're going to go ahead and wrap up. We're right at 3 p.m. We appreciate everyone for coming and for contributing, and we want to give a big thanks to our presenter Jeremy again. So thanks everyone for attending, and we hope to see you soon. Take care.
Thanks, Justin.